My name is Kobei from the Indigenous Ogi community of the Mau Forest in Kenya, and the Ogi community is a hunter-gatherer community living in the ancestral home, which is Mau Forest. And I'm also a student pursuing my postgraduate diploma in law at Kenya School of Law. And I'm also the chair of Tirap Youth Trust, which is a youth organization. It was formerly known as the Ogi Youth Council. It is a youth Indigenous youth-led organization, which is working on issues to do with climate change, climate justice, environmental conservation, and youth empowerment, and also gender. For Indigenous people, custodianship means the granting of formal land rights to Indigenous people, which is something that the Ogi community has been seeking to achieve. And that is the reason why they went to the African court, because they want custodianship over the forest. They want to be given land rights to freely enjoy the resources that are in their territory, and granting these land rights to Indigenous people, not only the Ogi community but also other Indigenous communities. It's the most effective way of reducing issues such as illegal logging, illegal deforestation, and also poverty and global warming, and also climate change as a whole. And by protecting the forest, this is custodianship and protection are more or less the same thing, because when you grant these land rights to the Indigenous people, they own the forest. They treat it as their own home. They don't treat it as their home, but it is their home. So as once you grant custodianship over this forest, they will automatically protect the forest, and then which will reduce the instances of deforestation, instances of forest fires, and also instances of invasion of the forest by other communities who which when the forest is invaded by other communities, it will lead to the shrinking of forests, increasing deforestation and logging. So custodianship is granting the land rights to the people, and once the land rights has been granted to the people, it is their own, and they will automatically protect the ancestral home. Climate change is something that has been affecting. It's something that the Indigenous people have seen since the beginning. Like let's say 30 years ago, they had already seen that their ancestral home is changing. They're losing their livelihoods, and for us, maybe we're losing the honey. The bees that used to produce honey have reduced in number because of climate change. And Indigenous knowledge plays a critical role in protecting this forest, in fighting climate change, because these are Indigenous knowledge are knowledge that has been transferred from generation to generation. So my great grandfather and my grandmother, they used to protect the forest and they used to prevent forest fires by doing this. So they teach the younger generation, and once this knowledge is transferred from the younger generation from the older generation to the younger generation, it helps combat climate change. Climate change has opened room for other communities to invade our ancestral home, which has led to deforestation. And through deforestation, we have lost our livelihoods, as we are traditionally hunters and gatherers. So when climate change comes, meaning we no longer have food, we no longer have water, our rivers are also drying up, and also our honey, we can no longer practice our normal traditional ways. So we have to adapt to other forms of living, such as farming. And also, and that is the reason why some members of the community that were evicted from the ancestral land as a result of the eviction, have not yet come back to the ancestral home, because there's really nothing to come back to, because there's no food in our land. It has also led to food insecurity. There is no water. And that is the reason why we're trying really hard to restore and rehabilitate the destroyed forest and ensure that we can reclaim back the natural habitat that was once there. I need to see Indigenous people being recognized as people who are at the front line of fighting climate change. And going to COP is not necessarily a way of incorporating decision making, because when you go to the COP, going to those negotiating rooms is also something which is not really easy. So ensuring that you have an Indigenous people's representative in every advisory committee, in every meeting that happens prior to the COP, because I realized that most of the big issues are discussed at the national level and also at the regional level before going to the COP. So they need to ensure that there are Indigenous people's representative, and not only just to say, oh, we have an Indigenous person, but to give them a seat at the table, and their voices has to be their voices have to be amplified. They not only need to be just there, but when they say something, they need to listen to Indigenous people, because Indigenous people are the most affected. They're the ones who feel the most change, as all our livelihoods and all our resources are found in nature. As Indigenous people, we're already discriminated because we are few in number, and climate change on its own has exacerbated these challenges, and also including COVID-19 in the past 2 years. It has deepened the inequalities. For example, if it's access to water, an Indigenous woman or an Indigenous girl has to travel for long distances to access water, and they also have to, because the rivers are drying, they also have to adapt to various ways of livelihoods so that they can be able to eat something. So this climate change has really deepened inequalities. It has also led to poverty, because most of our livelihoods are in nature, and once there is no livelihood, we do not have food to eat, we do not have water to drink, and we don't have money to take our children to school, and also we can barely survive. So our survival is in nature, and once there is nothing, there is no food, there is no water, there is no access to education, and also access to social amenities such as healthcare, it really affects the Indigenous communities. Women and girls are the most vulnerable members of the society, and not only, but especially Indigenous communities, because Indigenous communities are patriarchal in nature, and meaning these women, they're the foundations of the society. They're the ones who take care of the family. They're the ones who fend for the family. If it's collecting firewood, they have to go and find ways of collecting firewood. If it's going to collect water, they're the ones who farm. They're the ones who fetch water for the family. So women and girls are the ones who are the most affected when comparing to other members of the society of the Indigenous communities. So women and girls are the ones with the knowledge. They're the ones who ensure that this traditional knowledge is transferred from the younger generation from the older generation to the younger generation. So they are the most important members of the society. I'll give an example of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It is the most comprehensive international instrument on the rights of Indigenous people, and unfortunately, not many countries have ratified this legal instrument. it has established the universal framework of minimum standards for the survival, for the dignity, and also the well-being of indigenous people of the world. So once a country ratifies this legal instrument, then the rights of indigenous people are protected. They'll be able to receive their rights to collective rights, their rights to own their land, their rights to freely enjoy the natural resources that are existent in their ancestral homes. And it also elaborates on existing human rights standards and the financial fundamental freedoms as they apply to indigenous people. So the law it states and stipulates these are the freedoms of indigenous people. These are the rights of indigenous people. And once these are not followed, the community has a right to go to court and state that their rights have been violated, and they'll be able to receive their orders, and their orders will be able to be met by the courts. And the reason why the Oge case has taken time for it to be implemented is probably because most African countries, and especially Kenya, do not recognize the existence of indigenous peoples. And this, unlike in other parts of the world, like Latin America and etc., in those countries they have legal instruments that protect them. The same way we have legal instruments that protect us as human rights, like the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. So the declaration is significant. The United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People is significant. Is significant because it was during the drafting, the people who are involved are indigenous people. So the declaration was written for the indigenous people by the indigenous people. The root of this problem is actually greed. What I mean is that most of the things that people desire are found on lands of indigenous people, like oil. You'll find oil in the Amazon or in Congo forest, and you'll find other resources in Mau forest or in other forests around the world. So the reason why we're losing this connection is because we are punishing. It's like we are punishing the planet, and the planet did everything to take care of us. So that's why we're going to invade land. We're going to drill on territories of indigenous people, and these indigenous people later suffer. They die from cancer. They get early maternal death, and other things that are affecting us and killing our people. And once we have lost this connection to nature, that's when our forests shrink, and that is when we start suffering from the consequences of our greed. I'll use a good example. Like here in Kenya, it's March, and normally it's normally very, very cold around this time. Not really cold, but it rains in March. But it has been very hot till 29 degrees. Like right now, it's 29 degrees, and I'd say that the planet is now punishing us for action, because we went and killed the things that are lost our connection, the connection that the planet loves us. The planet gives us water. The planet gives us the air that we drink. But we are destroying it. We are destroying it by destroying the people that protect this planet. And how can we rekindle this connection? I'd say we should go back. We should go back to our roots. We go back to where it all began. If for me, I'll go back to the forest, because that is where I find peace and calm. And that is when that is when everybody will be able to appreciate what the planet and nature has to offer for us.